Okay, we're recording.
Okay.
Chicken noodles.
Okay,
Bean
first thing
salad,
I should
dessert.
say
Can I have this? Yeah.
is that Laura and I walked Lamson Woods yesterday, and I'm happy to report that most of the April wildflowers are out, and we can see them later on today if people choose. Now, the first thing I think we should talk about is just what is a spring ephemeral. The word ephemeral refers to the fact that it is fleeting. It's only there for a short period of time. And so you should think of these spring ephemerals in the same way that tulips, crocus, a lot of your spring bulbs are, in that they just appear for a short period of time in the spring, and usually by summer, they disappear. So when it gets hot and when it gets dry, a lot of these things will disappear. There are a few exceptions to that, but the majority of them are just here in the spring. So their life cycle is very short. So they have to bloom, be pollinated, and set seed, and then disperse their seed, and then they die back, usually by July or so. The other thing is that these plants have evolved in mostly woodland environments. There are some ephemerals that are in prairies, but for the most part, the flowers that come up early in the spring, particularly in April, are all in woodlands in southeast Iowa. So the other thing that should be noted is that the reason they're able to do this kind of thing, come up early and have their life cycle in the spring, they do that before the leaves emerge on the trees. So they actually are in the sun, and they have the full spring sunshine, and are able to carry on photosynthesis quite successfully and so forth in April. Most of them are also somewhat tolerant of frost, as you would expect a plant that would come up in April would be. So the first one on the list is the photo that you see here, and that is Cardamine douglasii, otherwise known as spring cress and sometimes called purple cress. This is a perennial wildflower. It's only about 4 to 12 inches tall. The ones we saw yesterday were about 4 to 6 inches at that. And you have basically a central stem that terminates in this raceme of flowers that you see on the screen there. Most of the ones that we have around here are white, but you can see that it is kind of a light purple sometimes flower, going to sometimes occasionally a stronger purple pink. And the blooming occurs to early to mid-spring, and it lasts about just 2 weeks, and the flowers are fragrant. So it's pollinated by all kinds of bees, and also some flies, and butterflies will appear on the plant. And there's a flea beetle that prefers it also. So I'm going to go through here and just touch on basically, the kinds of insects and so forth that feed on this, because I think it's kind of an important thing for people to realize is that nothing in nature exists in a vacuum. Something is food for something else. Something is depends on its survival by pollination or by animals coming in to help out in the translocation of the seeds. There are a number of our spring wildflowers, for example, that are spread by ants. So the ants will gather up the seeds, and then they will take them back to their nest, and then the seeds will sprout underground because the ants brought them there. The next one is Spring beauty. And spring beauty is something that probably more than any other wildflower in the spring is the one that is the most common. So you go to any woodland anywhere in southeast Iowa, and this is what you see. And it's up now, and it's just tiny little things. They're only like about 3 or 4 inches tall, and they consist of just some little calling leaves. They're generally kind of white with a fine pink stripe, and it occurs, about now, and it has a fairly long bloom, about 1 to 2 months. It has a pleasant scent, and it forms a small corm, which is like a bulb, but also has some secondary roots. So it spreads both by these corms, and it reseeds itself. So eventually, you have a large quantity of spring beauty, and they form big colonies. And then various kinds of bees will visit the flowers. So honeybees, bumblebees, carpenter bees, cuckoo bees, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a big bee thing. And then many flies also. And they seek the nectar, although some of the bees also collect pollen. Some rodents will eat the corms also. Next on the list is one of the earliest ferns. And this is a very unique fern, Cystopteris protrusa. It's called fragile fern. And I have lived most of my adult life back east. And so there's a huge number of ferns in all the woods back east. And I wasn't sure that there were going to be ferns in Iowa when I first came here. But they're actually, most of them carry over. Not all of them, but most of them. And one of the ones that I was very surprised about, and this is a very small fern. And you only see it in the spring. And then again, it'll make a reappearance in the fall. But for the most part, it's just in the spring, and it's just about 4 inches tall, and it covers quite a large area. But as soon as it gets warm and it gets hot, it dies down and goes dormant in the summer. So we did see quite a bit of this out at Lamson Woods, although it's about 40 minutes in or so. The interesting thing about ferns is that most of them are not particularly tasty to critters. So that's one reason they have survived for millions and millions of years for that reason. Although I have seen rabbits eating some ferns, but deer generally leave most of the ferns alone. Going on to the next one. This is toothwort, Dentaria. And I should also say, Laura, anytime if I'm leaving something out, jump in. So you have basically 4 little white petals that sort of hang in little clusters like you see. The flowers are quite fragrant. And you can see it has these sort of curious toothed leaves in groups of 3 like that. So it's fairly distinctive. It does form colonies, and it spreads by rhizomes. So again, another one that you often see in abundance. And places where garlic mustard is taking over, what tends to wipe it out. So this is an important one to remove the garlic mustard if you want to keep this around. Again, bees will be pollinating this. One thing when researching this, I found that the tubers of this plant used to be a minor food source for passenger pigeons. Of course, the passenger pigeons are now extinct. Going on to the next one. This is one of my favorites. It has a fun name and it has a fun flower. Dutchman's breeches. You can see why it has the name. There's little upside down breeches that are the flowers, little white breeches. And I don't know why it necessarily has to be a Dutchman, but there it is. It's a small little plant. It has very nice feathery foliage. We did see some that were still in bloom at Lamson, so we will find it, although a lot of this has already gone out of bloom. And then it's one of the earlier ones to disappear when the weather gets warm. Again, propagated by bees and flies. And then the seeds have little appendages that are oily, and they're very attractive to ants. And so ants will carry the seeds away and plant them. And the ants will eat just the little appendages on the seeds, but of course then the seeds will sprout. And the foliage is toxic, so you won't find anything eating on it. And that's true for all dicentras. So the bleeding heart family generally is left alone.
Steve, do you see Diane's question?
No.
Yeah.
So if you can, if you want to read me the question.
Oh, she wanted to know if squirrel corn was different than Dutchman's breeches. Yeah.
Yes, squirrel corn is different. It's slightly different. What we see around here mostly is Dutchman's breeches. Laura, you could probably speak better as to whether you see squirrel corn. I have not yet.
I haven't seen it around here, but I've seen it at Cedar Bluff. But it's also a dicentra, and the leaves are quite similar, but the interesting difference is instead of looking like little pantalones, you know, it looks like a bleeding heart, Diane. You know, the flowers are shaped almost exactly like a bleeding heart. So if you see one of those, it's pretty cool around here. Yeah.
This is false meadow rue. And this is a bit confusing for myself, as probably as well as other people, because the true meadow, or the true, excuse me, not meadow rue, false rue anemone. What we saw yesterday in Lamson was rue anemone, not the false one, but the two are very similar. And basically the false one generally is almost always white, whereas true rue anemone is usually pinkish or kind of a blush pink. And what it is, you see there, tiny little white flowers and these kind of three-lobed leaves. Again, pollinated by bees and flies, rarely browsed by deer. Here's one of ones that are just starting to bloom now. These are trout lilies. And it is, as the name suggests, in the lily family, so it will have a little corm or bulb-like structure underneath it there. It does produce some fibrous roots as well, and it sends out underground stolons. So then a few inches away, you'll get more plants. And then if you leave it alone for long enough, you have large colonies of this. When it's young, you just get like one leaf, but you get, you know, 2 leaves or more, and then you get some actual blooming flowers that are this small little lily. It's only about 3 or 4 inches tall. I'm a, you know, but again, since I spent most of my adult life back east, the trout lily we have there is bright gold. So I was surprised, and actually I think I kind of like it better to see it as white, which we have mainly. This is the version we have out here, although there are some yellow ones around, but they're kind of rare. This one is not in flower yet, but I was sort of captivated by this plant when I first came here and 2 years ago, and was walking about in my woods, and I kept seeing this variegated spotted leaf everywhere, and I didn't know what it was, because I think this is actually the time of year in early April where the plant is the showiest. So it's called waterleaf for the obvious reason in that it looks like it's got water spots on the leaves. The first leaves that come up in the spring will have that. And then as the new leaves emerge and it gets taller, it's just all green. So right now you can see both stages of this. You can see the first leaves still, and you can see the taller leaves that are starting to come out. And then in May, it'll have a white flower. Here's everyone's favorite. And I'm happy to report they are blooming now in Lamson Woods. And some of them are blooming in my yard as well. And I was telling a friend like last night that this is evidence that the wee folk are very active on this plant. And what I mean by that is that it starts out pink, and then the flowers turn blue. And I'm sure it's just elfin magic that occurs, you know, I can see them flicking their wands and making the pink flowers turn blue. That's just my imagination, of course, but it is, anything in the borage family does tend to do that. So I'm always sort of captivated by the fact that colors change as the flower ages. But in addition to that, the blue color on this is just penetrating. So it is probably our showiest flower that we have, and you know, we're so lucky to be able to have something like that around here. It does form colonies, it's pollinated again by bees and flies, and there are some butterflies and skippers that will come to it, including the hummingbird moth. And in some areas, if the ruby-throated hummingbird is here a little early, it will feast on these flowers as well. The deer will browse occasionally on the foliage. And then usually by June or so, it's pretty much gone. So it disappears. Okay, moving on. Jacob's ladder. This is Pulmonium reptans, or Jacob's ladder. This one will get a little taller, and this one is, I would say, it usually lasts most of the season. So this is a little different from the rest in that it's not that ephemeral. If we have a drought, it will disappear, but it does stick around a little better than some other ones. The reason it's called Jacob's ladder is that you can see that the leaves kind of resemble a ladder. That was, I guess, a dream of the biblical Jacob. So it has kind of light bluish flowers. The flowers, because they're such a light blue, are not as striking as, say, the Virginia bluebells, but it nonetheless is kind of a pretty little plant, and it's very common around here. I have a ton of it in my garden, and we did see, you know, a good portion of it in Lamson Woods as well. I'm happy to report this is blooming now in Lamson, and this is swamp buttercups. Probably one of the prettier of the buttercups. There's a lot of different buttercups that will grow around here. Most of them, I would say, are kind of thugs that can kind of clamber around and take over things and spread rather voraciously. But this one limits itself to the really swampy kind of damp areas, as the name swamp buttercups says. And this is at, when we took the trail and walked the farthest, this is kind of at the end of the line. We did see these blooming, and they were, you know, rather short, kind of like what you see here. Again, it's pollinated by bees and flies, and there's a number of things that will eat the foliage. So there's some, you know, sawflies and leaf beetles and things that eat the foliage. And then it is a little bit toxic, so a lot of the animals will not eat the foliage, but some do nonetheless. Wild turkeys are one of the creatures that will eat this, and I've noticed wild turkeys. I'm not too particular about a lot of things. Perhaps Diane could speak to that fact. I don't know, but they seem to kind of, you know, peck at almost anything.
Steve, Diane was asking what are some of the good ways to recognize swamp buttercup?
Perhaps you can speak more about it.
I mean, I go a lot by the shape of the leaves, and it's just kind of in a little clump, you know, and there's one here, one there nearby each other, and the size of the flower, you know.
I can't really tell which leaves belong to that flower.
Yeah, yeah. When we go out today.
The leaves are kind of like there are
Okay.
compound leaves.
Okay.
Yeah, you have a lot of other grasses and things growing up in this photo, but we'll see it when we get out there.
Yeah, and there's another buttercup out there right now called Ranunculus abortivus, which it has a teeny tiny flowers. The petals are like almost inconspicuous, so that's way different than this one, which has a really obvious flower too, you know.
And plus the name is always just fun. I just always like the name Buttercup. Yes. There's our bloodroot. Sanguinaria canadensis. It's sanguine, bloody. And bloodroot is an apt name because when you take the root and you break it, it has a red sap. It first sends up these very large leaves like that, and then it has these very simple white flowers. The flowers are rather fleeting. They're only there for a few days, maybe a week. This year, because we had very warm temperatures in early April, the flowers have passed in, I would say, probably most cases around here by now, but you can still see some of the foliage, although we didn't find any bloodroot out there at Lamson yesterday, but you do find it around. It should be noted that the sap is actually toxic, and the Native Americans made a red dye from the sap. But the genus possesses antibacterial properties, and so you know, they're making anti-plaque mouthwash out of it. And there's a black salve that they commonly use with this, but I don't recommend it because you know, for example, if someone has a wart or maybe a skin cancer that they're trying to get rid of, and they use this black salve made from this plant, it actually destroys the cancer, but it just also destroys your skin. So it will leave a thick scar. So it works, but at the cost of maybe some skin as well. So I would kind of stay away from that. But it's an interesting use, and that's why I mention it.
And of course, we wouldn't be digging these up to see if it had a red root because there's
Yeah.
not that much of it around. But it's just lovely when it begins because it's just that one leaf is curled around, you know, before
Right.
it blooms. It's just beautiful.
And it's a very large leaf, you know, I mean, it's like 5 inches across. Sometimes I've seen it. So it's not as diminutive as some of the others, but it's a nice, simple kind of beauty to it. This is the true ruin anemone. And I'm happy to report we found a nice little colony out at Lamson, so we should be able to see them. And as you see, they're just kind of a sweet blush pink like that. They're also white, but I usually find them around here to be blush pink. And you notice it has that very distinctive foliage as well. Almost similar to a cardamom foliage, but basically the 3 little leaflets together like that. Pretty unique. Again, pollinated by bees and by flies. And the foliage is toxic, so it's ignored by most critters. And then we come to the last one on the list here for the April ones. No, not quite. We got a few more yet. We got, after this, the violets. Trillium, otherwise known as wake robin. And this is the prairie wake robin. It's kind of a misnomer because it exists in the woods rather than in the prairie, but it at least lets you know that it is further west than the other trilliums. The white trillium, you know, that was the one that I always saw growing up in Michigan, but this is the one that we have out here most frequently in Iowa. So it has a very unusual, just these 3 leaves, and then just 3 purple petals like that in the center. It's just now starting at the bloom stage, so we did find some of them out there that were blooming. Many of them are almost opened at the bloom stage. It attracts carrion beetles and flesh flies, rather gruesome it sounds. And there are some caterpillars that will eat the foliage. And sometimes deer will browse on the foliage of trilliums. And that's actually one of the ways that the seeds are dispersed. So, and a true ephemeral. So it's really just there for about a month, maybe 2 at the most, and then it disappears again. We did see this out at Lamson blooming, our little yellow violet. Very sweet little yellow flowers and, you know, simple cordate foliage like that. Many people consider violets to be, dare I say, a weed. I don't view them that way. I think they're one of our nicest little native ground covers, but you have to think of them as a ground cover because generally one trait of this entire species is that they kind of spit out their seeds all over the place, and they're tiny little seeds, and you have one plant, and then next year you'll have a bunch more, and then next year they quickly colonize, and they like moist areas, but if it gets dry in the summer, they'll die down to the ground, and then they come back. So you can't kill them. So it's one of these easy care kinds of things. I've used this probably too often, but we used to sell plants like this and explain to them when the Soprano series was on the television that it's a total soprano plant. You can put it in and then you forget about it. So it always is there. It always comes back. Again, propagated are pollinated by bees, and there are many caterpillars that will eat the foliage, and juncos will also eat the seeds, as well as some other game birds. The more common one, although this one's pretty common, is the little purple violet, or the common blue violet. And this is out there blooming now. Again, just a few inches tall, the little heart-shaped leaves. It's just a cutie. And again, you know, same kind of thing as the other, the yellow violet. It's pollinated by various bees and flies. And certain butterflies, fritillaries will go to it. And a number of things eat the foliage. So it is, the foliage is tasty to a lot of critters. And actually, I believe the flowers are actually edible as well. So that's another thing. Some people use the flowers as garnish, you know, in salads and things. And then one last violet we have around here, and it's a little rare, but it is here nonetheless, and it's native, is the cream violet. So if you see a white violet, that is the cream violet, and that spreads even more than the other violets do. So if you have it, it will spread by underground runners as well. So that is out at Lamson in some places. Laura, perhaps you can say a little bit about the cream violet.
Well, the cream violet is actually, or Viola striata is actually on the state list of special concern plants, because we do have it in Jefferson County, but throughout the state there's very little of it. And there's just one section in Lamson where it grows, and it's quite colonial, but I've seen it a lot in people's yards in Jefferson County. But it's a sweet little plant if we find it. And as to Diane's is asking about the blue violets, and I haven't looked into their taxonomy recently, but the last time I did, the taxonomy of blue violets is very complicated, and it's, you know, you really have to dig in to figure out which blue violet you have. It's not an easy thing.
Right.
You know, the yellow one and the cream one, they're easy, but the blue ones are a little trickier, you know. So.
Yeah, the most common one is Viola sororia, but there's also, oh, what's the other one? There's like 2 or 3 other names that are very similar. And then there's also varieties of it, like there's one called a Confederate violet, which will have sort of a lighter blue, kind of multicolored, but that's actually a variety of the common violet. So yeah, as Laura was saying, it's a little complicated.
There'll be some expert that's working on that group, but as I said, that I haven't looked into it lately, you know, but there are people who work on such things and try to figure out the whole systematics of it.
Okay,
But
now
for our purposes, you know.
Yeah, for most people's purposes, just calling it a common violet, I think, will do. Okay, now I'm going to close. For a minute, so bear with me. I'm going to go to another file for the May wildflowers. So I'm going to have to stop share momentarily and then open up the May one.
Diane, I think the ones that you want might be coming up. Yeah. Mm.
That was me. That was Claudia, not Diane.
Oh, I'm sorry. About the wild geranium?
Yeah, and Solomon seal and the Mayflower.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's probably a Mayflower.
Okay, so can we see the yarrow?
Yes.
Okay, good. Can everyone see the yarrow? You can raise your hand or give a nod or something. Okay,
Yes.
good. All right, success. All right, this one is a little how to explain it. Yarrow is both naturalized and native,
Huh.
and thereby is a little confusing. For most people's purposes, it's not important to know whether you have the naturalized one from Europe or Asia, or whether you have the native one, because they're so similar that they're almost indistinguishable. But there is a slight difference. One is the one that is truly native is Achillea millefolium variety occidentalis. But it's so close in appearance to the introduced one, which was brought over probably by pilgrims and spread everywhere, that it almost doesn't matter. It grows about 1 to 2 feet tall, and it develops the foliage very early on. So it has this feathery kind of basal foliage like that. And then in May, or even early June, it'll send up these flower spikes, which have these corymbs of many little white flowers. And they have turned this into a cultivated plant by finding ones that have various colors and reproducing it clonally, so that you have a consistent flower color, whether it's pink or whether it's yellow or whether it's kind of an orangey color. So there's lots of different colors like that. The root system does produce rhizomes, so it will form colonies. Again, pollinated by a variety of insects, bees. There's several species of grasshopper that will feed on the yarrow foliage. Tree crickets will do the same. However, most of your critters are very reluctant to feed on the foliage, and that's why yarrow has spread so successfully, is because, you know, basically other critters stay away from it. It does have a very distinctive fragrance to it. Sort of sweet, but, well, it's one of these things you can't really describe the fragrance very easily.
Steve, Diane was asking whether the native insects like the introduced.
I think it's okay. They seem to be fine with it either way. So that's why I said this one is so close, it doesn't matter. And, you know, I went back and forth a long time trying to find, is it really native? And it is, but, you know, only a particular variety. But the genus and species is circumpolar, meaning that it's found everywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. Go ahead, Laura.
Oh, I tend to think of this one as a little bit more open field plant than a woodland plant, you know.
It is very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
So if it is, I guess when it made an appearance at Lamson, it was probably on the forest edge, if that.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
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 Okay.
And of course, the flowering stalks, the long, tall sticks, are what they used to use for the I Ching divination, you know, from the book changes, you know.
And the other thing
Yarrow
about it is that you can actually make sort of a yarrow lawn. It can actually be a ground cover that you mow if you so chose to. So it makes kind of a nice feathery appearance. Of course, you'd have to go through and, you know, give a little maintenance to it every once in a while. But it can actually take mowing if the mowing is, you know, if you set the mower high, like 6 inches or so. And you find it basically in every ditch, and, you know, it's common along the roadside. One of our most beautiful ferns, not yet up, but coming to a woodland environment soon in your neighborhood, is the maidenhair fern. They're very distinctive. It has a bipinnate leaf that you see here that's pedatum, you know, like there's fingers coming off of a central stalk like that. And not the easiest fern to grow. So it likes fairly rich soil and a fair amount of moisture with dappled shade. So it does well, you know, in our oak savannas, but it, you know, it has to have fairly decent soil. Again, like most ferns, it's left alone by most animals. Wild garlic. You have a basal rosette of leaves that are just very simple little, almost like stems that grow up. And you can actually use them as you would any other onion. Reproduces by seeds or other little bulbs. So it has bulb offsets. It's attracted to onion bees, mason bees, you know, flies. You know, onion flies, that sort of thing. But basically, deer and rabbits avoid eating anything in the onion family. So it's used to kind of interplant with some vegetables or other plants that are tempting, so the scent can throw off the critters. Usually you see it more in open areas than in the woodland, though. And it has just kind of a light pinkish flower like that, usually in May. Didn't see these yet over at Lamson, but this is, it's called tall thimbleweed, but it is Anemone virginiana, so another anemone. This is a tall one, as the name suggests. It's about 2 feet tall. And then we'll have these white, simple flowers like that you see. And then we'll have sort of a little fluff of when the flowers turn to seeds. Again, pollinated by bees and flies. And most of the critters leave it alone. So it contains a blistering agent that will not be a pleasant experience. I kind of like this plant. It's plantain leaf pussy toes, or if you just call them pussy toes. There's about, 3 or 4 species that I think are around here. This is the most common one. And it has silvery foliage basal leaves, like you see down here. And then we'll put up these little stalks of fuzzy little pussy toes, cat's feet, sort of, that stick up above it, and they're usually white like that. And they like a fairly dry area. So you'll see them in the woods occasionally, but it's fairly open and dry on the tops of things, rather than, you know, in the damp. It does form stolons, so you'll get colonies of these. And sometimes bobwhites and deer will eat it, rabbits, but not that often. Here's a fun one. Green dragon. This is an Erycema. Gets to about 2 feet tall. And you just have this very unusual single stalk with this very large and bodacious divided leaf like that. And then it has this flower, which is a spathe and a spadix here. On green dragon, it's not very showy flower, but very unusual. And then later on in the season, the seeds look like that. So you'll see those berries in the summertime. They attract flies and fungus gnats, and the berries are eaten by wild turkeys again. And it does form a corm, and the corm is highly toxic. So this is one that has oxalate in it, which causes a burning sensation. So don't eat it. And then the one that is even showier, that I think most people have a little bit of romantic feeling towards, little soft spots for, at least I do, is the Jack in the Pulpit. And the Jack in the Pulpit, if you look carefully, is a much showier flower. Again, a spadix and spath flower. And you usually have some stripes that are purple, some purplish markings in the flower. And then the stems are also purplish and has some spots on it. And then it usually has these two large leaves like you see there that are divided in three ways, hence Erythema triphyllum, trifoliage. Gets to about 2 feet tall, just very distinctive. And then later on in the season, it will get the berries like that, the bright red berries. And again, like the other Erythema, the green dragon, it is has oxalate in it, so do not eat.
Steve, how did you describe those markings on the spadix there?
Let me see if I can go back. There we go. Yeah, it varies a bit. It can be light green or reddish green, and it does have usually some white to burgundy stripes. You can just see some of the striping there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you can see it a little better there.
Yeah, great.
Not up yet, so be another month. Well, two weeks or so we should see it.
Oh.
It's just starting to come up. This is wild ginger. Wild ginger is Serum canadense. A little ground cover. You have to kind of search for it, but when it's very distinctive because it has these very nice heart-shaped leaves. It is a spreader, and then it has these, if you dig for it, you have to kind of look under the leaves, but it will have these very distinctive sort of purplish to russet colored flowers like that. The flowers attract flies and beetles, and those are the pollinators for this plant. And then ants will disperse the seeds. And toxic foliage, so the critters leave it alone. So a nice little ground cover. When I was in the nursery trade, we sold a lot, just about any of this that we could make, we could sell it because it's not the easiest thing to propagate. But it is popular. It's just starting to come up now. So I didn't see any in Lamson, but I know I've seen some in my own backyard.
Yeah. And it is there, but
yeah.
Catherine is asking, are the roots edible?
The root system it does have rhizomes. I am not sure if it's edible. It does have sort of a, as the name suggests, it has a gingery kind of warmth to it. And I suspect that it was used, the roots were used as a flavoring Um, Perhaps Catherine knows more about it than I do, but I think that is correct, that that they did use it for that purpose. But of course, ginger, the true ginger is easily found in the grocery store, so I would go with that instead.
Yeah. And
rather than
Steve,
pick this
oh.
up. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, one more question about it. Diane wondered if you propagated the wild ginger from seed or from divisions, or how did you?
Division was probably the more common way. It could be propagated by seed, but I think it had a long, it might require 2 seasons or something in order for it to sprout, 2 winters. So I don't think it's as easily propagated. And division, they'd get little rhizomes and start the rhizomes out, and that's, I think, typically the way it's propagated. We didn't see this out there, but it's quite distinctive. As this is rattlesnake fern. Probably be another few weeks before it actually comes out at Lamson. But what's so distinctive about it is that it's rather small, doesn't get any more than a few inches tall, and then you have this fruiting structure here where the spores are up in this section. So an unusual Botrychium rattlesnake fern.
Steve,
Yeah.
Back on the other one, Claudia mentioned that she uses roots to propagate the wild ginger.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then the story about this one I was telling you yesterday about the Botrychium, it's called
Yeah.
rattlesnake fern, where one of the old-time Iowa field botanists, Sylvan Runkle, he used to take people out in the woods and with his walking stick, and he'd find one of those and he'd go rattlesnake, and get everybody all excited and, tell them about it. It's
Yes.
a beautiful plant. Yeah.
It's quite a distinctive little fern. I would say it's almost like a princess pine or something, although it's not, because that's a club moss. But but it has that kind of appearance to it. It's one of these little magical things that's out there. Yeah. As this is also pretty magical. This is our native Camassia or wild hyacinth. It's right now it's out there with just a low rosette of foliage with basal leaves, but then it will put up this stalk and have light blue violet flowers, sometimes nearly white, and it will appear like that in May. And the blooming period is just for mid to late spring, lasts about 2 weeks or so. And then the root system is a bulb with fibrous roots. And in some parts of the country, the bulb is actually eaten. The Native Americans on the West Coast did eat the Camassias that were the Camassia bulbs that were out there. However, it's full of inulin, so if you're going to eat these things, you have to cook them really good. Otherwise, they can, well, we won't go into that.
Steve, can you tell if that's a delphinium in the background there? Or someone was asking if it.
Yeah, we will get to delphinium. It seems a little tall for a delphinium. It almost looks more like a salvia of some sort, but it's too hard for me to tell if that's a delphinium. So I'm going to say I don't know. This could be in a cultivated garden, so it could be something else.
But this wild hyacinth, Lamson Woods is the only place I've seen it around here, so it's pretty neat to be able to see it there. Yeah.
Well, that makes it a real gem. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And here is your, yes, I see Diane is swooning. The color of this is quite extraordinary. So this is our native delphinium or woodland larkspur. And unlike some of the other large spurs, which are very tall, this is a rather short species, but it does have that wonderful deep cobalt blue to gentian blue to violet blue kind of flower. And it has this, very divided leaf. Mine have come up. They're not flowering yet, but they will do so in about 2 weeks or so. So, when you see this, it is a wonderful thing, and everyone always wants some. It is a true ephemeral, like I was saying, though, so it will disappear in June, as Diane found out when she tried to collect seed and went back for it, thinking that there'd be something left to see, and alas, it had completely disappeared. So you have to kind of watch it and, be right on top of it to collect seed. The flowers are cross-pollinated again by many bees. Ruby-throated hummingbirds like it, the giant bee fly, the swallowtail butterflies, skippers, and moths. So it is a flutter with all kinds of insects and pollinators. There are some insects like aphids and various caterpillars and maggots and things with leaf foliage as well. But it is, like all delphiniums, it's fairly toxic, and so most of your mammals leave it alone. And another favorite is the wild geranium or wild cranesbill. And I have to say, I like to call it a cranesbill rather than a geranium. And the reason for that is that the Latin name on this plant is geranium. So it is a true geranium, but because people call pelargoniums geraniums, those big round red flowers that they use in the window boxes and so forth, they tend to get very confused. And so I will call it cranesbill because the seed structure of the flower looks like a crane's bill. So it has this kind of pointed bill that comes out that will disperse the seed.
What family is that in, Steve?
It's geranium family. I mean, I think it has its own family. I'd have to go back and see if the family is truly geranium, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
I could look it up, but there are a lot of different geraniums. This is our true native cranesbill. There are a lot of them that grow in Europe and Asia as well, and they're also very showy. But this one forms a nice ground cover, and in my backyard, I have almost like a half an acre of these, and when that blooms in May, it is pretty breathtaking. It gets to about a foot tall, maybe sometimes if it really has a lot of moisture, we'll get to 2 feet tall, but it has these, really nice pink flowers in May, and although the flowers are only about an inch, so there's enough of them that they'll cover the plant, and you can get just a whole sea of pink in the backyard or into the Lamson Woods or wherever it is. The root system, it has a short, stout rootstock that has a rhizome, and so it will form colonies from the rhizome. And then all kinds of bumblebees, mason bees, cuckoo bees, longhorn bees. It's a very pollinator-friendly plant. So it's a good one for all the different pollinators, probably about the best one we have here in Iowa for pollinators, with the exception maybe of 2 others, and that is any kind of agastache, and then also the mountain mint, but those are meadow prairie plants, whereas this is the true woodland one.
And somebody said they sell this geranium maculatum at Ostrander's, one of the local nurseries, as a garden plant. And it is Geraniaceae, the geranium family. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I thought it had its own family. The other thing you mentioned selling it, we sold, at the nursery that, that I used to work for, we sold two forms of this. One was just a wild form, Geranium maculatum. The other one was Geranium maculatum, and then the cultivar was Espresso, which was a purple leaf form, which was also very attractive. And it was a nice dark color of the foliage that made the flowers really pop all that much more. Otherwise, pretty much the same. But of course, the green one, I think if you're doing a more naturalistic landscape, is the one that is preferred, at least to my eye.
Claudia said that that dark one is the one they sell at Austrian. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I like them how nature made them, you know.
Yeah. Well, and nature made the espresso too. It's not like it wasn't, but it's, as you would expect, it's reproduced clonally rather than from seed. This is, we talked about waterleaf before, and that was, we showed just the foliage in April. This is waterleaf with the flowers. So it has just these simple little white flowers like that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you can see now how the leaves have turned completely green.
Huh.
Okay, I'm going to go forward a little bit. There we go. False Solomon seal. Similar to regular Solomon seal, but this is the one that is in the genus of Mayanthemum, whereas the true Solomon seal is
Mhm.
a polygonatum. Yes, polygonatum. So they're actually two different genus. But I like this one better, actually, because I just think it's a prettier looking plant. It has that nice feathery, almost a stilby-like flower in the spring. And then in the summer and fall, we'll have these nice red berries like that. So I find it a very attractive plant. Some people, because it tends to be abundant, tend to sort of not consider it as something that might be worthwhile for the garden, but I think it is.
Which one is that again?
This is the, it has changed its genus in the last few years. It's now a Mayanthemum racemosa false Solomon seal.
False Solomon seal. Okay.
Right. Whereas the true Solomon seal we'll get to a little bit later, and you'll be able to tell the difference. But see how it spreads here on the bottom? So it does put out these runners, and we'll take over some real estate if you let it. Usually not voraciously. It's not not invasive really, but it will spread. Here's another very common fern we have. It's called sensitive fern. The interesting thing is that, well, it's called sensitive fern because it's very sensitive to frost. It is not sensitive to anything else. So it actually is a very tough fern and will grow in just about any circumstance. It, of course, appreciates some moisture, so it's not going to be where it's high and dry, but it's an easy growing fern and it does spread a bit. And you can see the sporangia, or the part of the plant that produces the spores are these here. And it has a kind of coarse look for a fern. It's not as deeply divided as some of the other ferns. And like most ferns, the foliage is toxic, particularly toxic to horses, I guess. We didn't see this up yet in Lamson, but it's very common. This is yellow wood sorrel, and it has your typical clover leaf. I don't think it is not a true clover. It is a sorrel. And I don't know if you could speak to that, Laura, as to what the difference was. I was trying to remember to get to look. It is not in the clover family, I believe. It's a little different. So it is an oxalis.
Yeah, it's an oxalis. Yeah.
There's lots of bees that this flower attracts, just this tiny little yellow flower. And it blooms for a long period of time, about 2 to 4 months. So it will stick around a bit if there's ample moisture. And the foliage is browsed by white-tailed deer and rabbits. Even though it's mildly toxic, it does have some oxalic acid in it, but not severely. And then there's some caterpillars that will eat on the foliage as well. The prettier of the two, however, is the Oxalis violaceae, the violet wood sorrel. And I was happy to see I have some of this just growing in my woods. And it is a very pretty little thing. Just about 6 inches tall. Again, very clover-like leaves and these dainty little purple, flowers like that. Again, fairly long bloom, about 1 to 2 months. And the root system has little bulblets. So you can spread them just with the, little bulblets.
Yeah, oxalis, unless they changed it, it did have its own family, Oxalidaceae.
I thought it was distinct, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and actually, we have two species of the yellow ones around here, so they're,
Okay.
you have to look at some, more fussy things to see which one the yellow one is, but there's
And
nothing like this, yeah.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the yellow ones is an invasive, or am I wrong? Because I might be thinking of black medic or something, because there's a bunch of things that look kind of similar.
Yeah. Well, they're both native,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
This is a plant that not enough people are familiar with, and I think they should get acquainted with, is a prairie ragwort. There are about 3 species of ragwort that grow in Iowa. This has recently changed from, what was it? Was it Oenoptera?
Senesio, or,
Right, Senecio, sorry.
Yeah.
Senecio, and now it's called Pachyra. But it's still the same plant. Prairie ragwort is what you most commonly see in southeast Iowa. A little north to us is the Pachyra aurea, which likes a little more moisture. And then Pachyra obovata is in northern Missouri, which actually, I think of all the 3, the Missouri one is probably the prettiest. And it will form a ground cover. The basal foliage is, makes a nice ground cover in itself. And so, for gardens, I think it has the most potential of those 3. But this is the one that you see most often. It's usually in areas of fairly open savannas or, prairie. And it blooms like that in May. And the yellow daisies just kind of grow up above the foliage like that.
and this one you can see at Waterworks Park when you walk around the reservoir, that you'll see this plant, when it's blooming.
Yeah, and I've seen it, what's the other one? Wood thrush, what's that called? Wood thrush garden, wood thrush. There's a little prairie preserve. The one I'm speaking of, it's a little to the west, to the east of us.
You mean Wood Thrush Woods
Yes.
State
I've seen it
Preserve?
there.
Yeah,
Yep, I've seen
Yeah.
it there.
yeah. Yeah, that's another state preserve people are not as aware of, because it's 8 miles out of town. Yeah.
But it's a very tough plant, and while I think it looks best amongst taller foliage because of the way the structure of the flowers and so forth, I like the foliage itself, the basal foliage, enough But I just think it makes a very worthwhile ground cover. Well, here's everyone's favorite, or one of the favorites. This is wild blue phlox. It can be purple, it can be pink, it can be white, but most commonly it's a blue. And it is perennial, nice, you know, fairly, when you have it, it's there all the time. The blooming period, mid-spring to early summer, has a nice fragrance. The root system is stoloniferous, so you'll get colonies. It's probably one of the ones that's more vulnerable to the invasion of garlic mustard. So you have to weed that out, otherwise it will take over and, you know, get rid of this. So we want to keep our woodland phlox around. Pollinated by a whole host of pollinators, bees and so on. Unfortunately, it's one of the favorites of rabbits and deer. So make sure and have a large block of it, because if they sample it, you know, you want to make sure to have some left over. And if you have a really bad population of, you know, if you have what I call bad news bunnies, you might even want to put a little protected barrier, some kind of little, you know, wire fence or something around it, at least when it's in the bloom stage. The bunnies just ate the ones that I had, and so I went into full Farmer McGregor mold on that. But they're sure pretty. And when you see, you know, a big savanna full of them, there can be, you know, very striking. Here we go. Another one of my favorites. Mayapples. So it's about a foot tall generally, and it has this nice umbrella palmate foliage like that. Spreads by, you know, underground long rhizomes, and it's a fairly vigorous spreader. So, you know, it generally is rarely seen just alone as one plant. It almost always is in a good sized colony. The flowers are short-lived, they have a pleasant fragrance, and then they're replaced by a little berry that contains several seeds. The berry is produced only when cross-pollination occurs, so it has to be pollinated. Pollinated by bumblebees and other long-tongued bees. Sawfly feed on the mayapple. Thrips do as well. The plant itself, the leaf and so forth, is fairly poisonous. And the seeds in the rhizomes are also poisonous. However, the berry is edible, and that's what the berry looks like. Even now, it is edible. You know, I would be a little careful with that. You should also take the seeds out of it. So don't just, you know, if you're going to have the berries, just try one or two of them. Don't have a lot of them. So be a little cautious with that. But yes, they are supposedly edible. And also just a very nice distinctive flower. Now, and you'll see this at Lamson, not in bloom yet, but because it's on a hill, then you can see the flowers much better. Otherwise, that umbrella kind of hides them.
And Steve, is it so on that, like, because you'll see like little mini forests of the mayapple,
Yeah,
and
right.
isn't it one of the things that if it has just kind of one leaf, that's not going to flower this year. It's when it has that double leaf is when it'll flower.
Very true.
Yeah.
Here's your true Solomon seal. So this is Polygonatum biflorum or Solomon seal. Gets to about 2.5 feet, and you can tell it's a spreader. The blooming period is late spring to early summer, and it has just these tiny little yellowish, greenish flowers that you see like little bells hanging from the stem like that, or from each leaflet. Again, attracted to berry bees, ruby-throated humbird will feed on the nectar of the flowers. The berries are was eaten by the prairie chicken, but also a lot of other woodland birds. And this, I must say, sadly, is probably one of the most favorite things to eat by deer. So I remember Diane walking through my property in May saying, "Oh my goodness, you have so much Solomon seal." And I said, "Wait 2 weeks." And you know, it's usually gone in short order because the deer will nibble it and just, you know, eat it all. But since it does grow by rhizomes, it does come back.
Steve, Diana is wondering, before flowering, what's the best way to tell the difference between Solomon seal and false Solomon seal?
Okay, the foliage is pretty distinctive. So the true Solomon seal almost unfurls almost like a fern does. Whereas your other false Solomon seal, not so much. And you know, once you find and identify a patch of true Solomon seal, and then find a patch of false Solomon seal, they are actually pretty distinctive. But of course, the most obvious is when they bloom, because the false Solomon seal has this feathery inflorescence at the end, whereas these little bells are kind of stepwise up the stem for the true Solomon seal. I don't know that I gave such a good answer to that, but it's sort of, also you see how it's a lighter green. Usually it's, you know, and the deeper colored one is usually the false Solomon seal. Here's one we saw at Lamson, but it's still pretty small there, but it has come up. This is jump seed or Virginia knotweed. And I like it mainly just because of the markings on the foliage. So it makes a nice ground cover, and it will, you know, spread, and it's a fairly vigorous ground cover. They always have this kind of chevron marking on them, and right now the chevron is completely covering some of the early forming foliage out there. But then, you know, little markings like this is usually more what you see in the summer. And it will last throughout the season. So that's another nice thing about it. Everything else is ephemeral. This one sticks around. The flowers on this I don't think are particularly attractive. They're just kind of little, tiny flowers on little stems that come out. And then the flowers will form the seed, hence the name jump seed is very appropriate, because then it kind of spits out the flowers, and then you have them everywhere. The root system is also rhizomatous, so again, this is a spreader. There are some cultivated ones that are in the garden. A few years ago, there was one that was popular for a little while, at least, called Painter's Palette. It was a variegated form in addition to the chevron. So it had very showy foliage to it, and was kind of popular for a little while until people began to realize that it started to pop up everywhere. And usually when the seeds were spread, the native one came up rather than the variegated form. One of Diane Porter's favorites, Sisrinchium angustifolium, or blue-eyed grass. Blue-eyed grass, kind of a misnomer because it's not a grass at all, but it has thin, strappy leaves. It is in the iris family. So it's better to think of it as an iris that has a, sort of a different bloom than most iris, but it is nonetheless in the iris family. The woodland one of this is what you see here. It's always a nice deep blue flower like that. And it blooms in May. And it's about, oh, what, about 10, 12 inches tall, something like that. And it forms a nice little clump. When we sold them at the nursery, they were very popular, and they should be, because they are, you know, a cute little thing. They stick around most of the year too. They don't disappear like some of the other ephemerals. It's actually fairly easy to grow, so it's not difficult, and easy to grow from seed too.
Beautiful.
The prairie one was usually lighter in color, and there's also white forms of both of these, the campestre as well as the angustifolia form. Now, I'm going to let Laura talk about these because I know she likes them in particular. The Ohio spiderwort and the Virginia spiderwort.
Okay. Well, around here we have two species of spiderwort, and their timing is different. The one that you see like in the ditches and kind of all over in the fields, it's tall, it's not hairy at all, and the leaves and the stem are kind of blue-green. That's Ohioensis. And but then there's another species, Tradescantia virginiana, which blooms earlier, and it's more of a woodland and a woodland edge species. And yeah, and then that one is on the state list of special concern plants because it is not found very many places in Iowa. There's another species called Bracteata, which we don't really have around here, but you have to look and see what kind of hairs are on the flowering buds there, and if they have glands on them or not, and that's how you tell the difference. But in Jefferson County, we have a lot of the Virginiana, which is the more rare one. So it's not so rare for us, but around the rest of the state it is, you know. And this earlier one, it's much shorter, and I just think it's just beautiful, you know. And I didn't see any yesterday. It's a little early yet, you know, but
the color on these is quite shocking, you know, because it is a very deep saturated, in this case, the Virginiana more purpley, but the blue on this is a really sky blue, and that's a rare color in nature. So I was less enthused about this plant when we grew them at the nursery because if you they're very sensitive to being without water. And so if they, you know, if you're growing them in a pot in a nursery and you let it go a few hours without water, then you get all kinds of damage on the foliage. So they always would look kind of tatty, particularly after they bloom. But in the ground, where they have more ample moisture, it's a real stunner, particularly, you know, if they're growing in a savanna kind of environment and you have a lot of, you know, Virginia wild rye and some other grasses that grow with it. When these flowers kind of stick up through the grasses like that, it's a real stunner. So that pretty much covers both the May and the April. Now, it's already 12:30, and we were going to, at 1 o'clock, go over to Lamson Woods. That does give everyone time to get there, but I'm wondering if people need a little more time. Should we make it 1:30? I'm certainly okay with it 1 o'clock, but what say you folks, if you want to
I have family to feed. There's no way I'm going to be there at
Right,
1
that's what I
o'clock.
was thinking.
We
So
could do
maybe-
it tomorrow. We could have the rain date and do it tomorrow. Maybe more people could come.
Well, we'll see what, I'm having others say, no, you know, we want to.
No.
Okay, so I'm thinking maybe at 2 o'clock. Does that give everyone enough time?
Hillary's saying 1:30,
1:30?
but I don't know. Yeah.
1:30,
I'm flexible, but whatever everybody else decides is fine with me.
okay.
But I would prefer today since we're already on track
Right.
about this.
Right, and I think it'll still be fresh in everyone's minds as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's helpful too. So yeah, and it turned out I'm seeing the sun kind of poke through a little bit, so it actually is kind of a nice day-ish.
Somebody is wanting 1 o'clock, but what are you saying now? 1:30 or 2 o'clock or?
1:30 maybe?
But what I'm thinking is I'll go out there anyway at 1 because there might be somebody not on this call that is planning to
Right.
go out there at 1. So I'll do that for sure.
Okay.
You know,
Now, I should also mention, I'm going to stop share now so that I can see everyone. I see 15 people, is that correct? About 15. Okay. Now, did everyone get that waiver? I had emailed out the waiver to the library, should have sent out a waiver.
Yes.
Okay, I should explain that a little bit. When we started this, and when I say we, I mean those of us in the Sierra Club, and we've been joining up with Rebecca there in the library, and they've been wonderful with us to, good, thank you, Jackson, to show us, to help us with these kinds of things. The Sierra Club is a national organization, and I think their home base may be out of California. And California has been hit very hard by COVID. And so they're very cautious about, we sort of without thinking put this out as a Sierra Club event, and then checked, oh, by the way, we can have this, right? And then National Sierra Club said, no. So unfortunately, we had to backtrack a little bit. And so this is no longer an official Sierra Club event. This is now through the Fairfield Public Library. And so we are going there as that group. And the waiver just says that, Laura and myself are vaccinated, and maybe many of the rest of you are as well. I'm sure it's really not that dangerous for most of us, but it will be outside. But nonetheless, we will mask up and just to be on the safe side. And I'm not going to force people to do it, but waiver and so forth. It should be there and signed, and I will bring some more forms with me so that when we meet there, if someone has forgotten to bring the form or whatever, I can have them sign there. So sorry to make you go through all that, but I think it's better just to err on the side of caution rather than run the chance, particularly now that the variants are out and these are even more catching and possibly more dangerous. So we'll just be good citizens and abide by it. Okay.
And Steve,
So,
reminder about the boots, because it's.
oh yes, that's a good thing to say. We did get some rain last night, and last week we had a lot of nice rain. We got about 3.5 inches of rain last week, and then another 1/8 of an inch last night. So wear your boots, folks. It is, there's some really soft soil there, so the mud puddles and so on. So make sure you have that. It's in the 50s today. If you're like me, I wear an old character's hat to block the sun, and just take the standard precautions that you would have when you're traipsing in the woods. There are a few places on the trail where there are trees that have fallen, and we have to walk around those. So if people have mobility issues, just be aware of that.
Otherwise, leap them gleefully.
Yes, right. But I just wanted to, make you prepared so that, people don't come and, not that I'm sure that anyone in this group would come with stilettos, but, it never ceases to.
I want-
Okay.
All right, so, oh, and the place to meet, just in case people are unsure, is off of, you turn off of Madison, and then what's that street you go down off of Madison?
Park Street.
Park Street. And then take Park Street down to the little parking area there by Lamson Woods. There's a boardwalk that goes out to a gazebo.
Very
We won't go as far as the gazebo, but the trail starts right on the boardwalk.
Or another good way is just go up a D as in Dog Street until you hit Fillmore, and then take Fillmore all the way east, and you're right at the entrance.
You know her?
Everyone knows how to get there?
Yes.
Okay, good.
How many people are involved?
About 10, I think.
Is this the old parking lot? Are we talking about the old parking lot at Lamson?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I mean, there's another way you can get to it is by parking off of Glasgow, but then it's a long walk in.
All right, you guys, I'm leaving. I'll see you when
Okay.
I.
About 1:30, well,
Bye.
Laura said she'll be there a little early. I'll probably get there about 1:30. And I'll bring more forms and,
If I don't get there by 1:30, I'll try not to step on the flowers.
Okay, all right. We'll see you there. Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Steve.
1:30.
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Steve, if you'd like a copy of this recording, do you want to drop a little flash drive off at the library and I can just,
Yeah, I can do that.
your
That's
flash
probably
drive?
the easiest way. Yeah.
Okay,
All right. Thanks, Rebecca.
bye-bye.
Rebecca, I got the message, 1:30.
Great.
Ah, good.
Thank you.